This is a very special show. This is a wonderful, amazing show. We've had necessary shows, but now we're going to take a look at a very, very important subject. And I think probably in the last couple of years, we have all learned how to spell Alzheimer's, and we know exactly what it is. But we have all of the information that we need to identify that large 800-pound gorilla that's running through our pipeline right now. You're watching the Esther Davis Show, and I want you to welcome my very, very special guest, Dr. Stephanie Johnson from Washington, D.C. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Excited to be here.
How are we treating you well here in Texas?
It's been wonderful. The South, you can't do better than that.
What are you doing here?
Well, I was invited to speak at the Potter's House on a symposium and a panel talking about Alzheimer's disease. And really, trying to bring information to the masses, because I think this is a disease that is often not talked about, although we are hearing more information about it through the media.
So you were on a panel at the Potter's House talking about Alzheimer's.
I was.
So we're beginning to at least talk about it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've been speaking now, I say, for the last couple of months. This is actually National Alzheimer's Awareness Month, November.
That's right. Okay.
And so I'm really excited by the generosity of people and also the interest in trying to learn more about this disease, in particular how it's affecting people of color.
Dr. Stephanie Johnson has a very impressive resume. It's about 4 pages. But I do want you to tell us how great you are, because I'm interested in why you went this route in medicine. So tell us a little bit about how great you are, and mention the schools. I know you're at Duke University. You've been to all of it, and you're doing research on Alzheimer's. I heard from a good friend of ours in Washington, D.C., that you were the utmost authority on Alzheimer's.
Well, there are very few people, I would say, probably my age, that are doing work in this area, as well as very few minorities who are doing research in Alzheimer's disease. And so I've had the opportunity to be a fellow at the National Institute on Aging, which introduced me to the world of Alzheimer's disease. And again, very few people of color who were involved in this research. And so I thought it was an opportunity to start to study something that I think, well, back then, of course, I didn't know how significant it was going to be.
Now, back then would be what, 8 years ago?
Yeah, about 8 years ago.
Long time ago.
I know. Okay. Well, I suppose. But anyway, it was an opportunity to study a disease that obviously is having significant ramifications today as well as in the future. So I have studied with some of the biggest and brightest names in the field. I was at Johns Hopkins. I've been at Duke, their Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So I have to say that I think I've had excellent training.
Dr. Johnson was featured in several papers this past week during, of course, National Alzheimer's Week. The Dallas Weekly, I'll say hello to all of the great people over there, did a story on it, mentioned it, because the Potter's House is one of the churches that has stepped up in our community to say, okay, we're going to do something about this. But you do a lot of speaking.
I do. I was just recently in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I wrote a white paper on...
What is a white paper?
White paper. White paper is a body of work that basically argues for whatever your cause is. And my argument is that Alzheimer's disease should be considered a health disparity. And so I laid out the reasons why systematically. And so I was able to articulate, I think, in a very specific way, why this really does need to be considered a health disparity, because if that is the case, we would get more funding for Alzheimer's disease research.
And we can do more research with that particular funding.
Exactly.
I'm going to be right back with Dr. Stephanie Johnson. We're talking about Alzheimer's, and you know what I want you to do? Call somebody and tell them we're talking about Alzheimer's, that big word that's coming into our lives right now and affecting all of us. I'll be right back. You're watching the Esther Davis Show. And we're back talking to Dr. Stephanie Johnson, the utmost authority on Alzheimer's in our country today. Before we went to break, she was telling me about how this thing is moving. We're going to talk right now about how fast is it moving and why is it moving so fast? Or is it just all of a sudden there and we weren't paying attention? What happened?
That's a very good question. I think right now we know that about 5.3 million people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and the projections are very scary. So if you look at the projections of individuals by year 2050, we think about 14.3 million people will be diagnosed. And I want to make sure people understand that we're only talking about Alzheimer's disease, not the other forms of dementia, which are very plentiful. But Alzheimer's disease is the most prevalent form of dementia, followed by vascular dementia.
Okay. Oof. That's another whole thing.
That's another. I mean, it's similar to Alzheimer's disease, but it is a bit different. We think, the research is still coming out in terms of characterizing vascular dementia, but we do feel that it really is a form of dementia and the second most prevalent form.
Now, one of the things that I thought about while we were talking in the dressing room, there is forgetfulness and there is dementia, and then there is Alzheimer's. When do we begin to notice that this is Alzheimer's and not forgetfulness?
Okay, so the first area of cognition, or the first types of symptoms you're going to see is short-term memory problems. What do I mean by that? I don't mean simply, forgetting where you put your keys or, putting your glasses down. As we get older, we're all going to start losing a little bit of memory.
Okay.
That's like with our muscles. They atrophy. The brain does slow down.
Okay.
However, what I mean by short-term memory problems is, your mother may lose her keys and they end up in the freezer. She might have put her glasses in the oven. Those sorts of things. Where,
that's serious, isn't it?
Those are very serious signs and things that you should not ignore. Do not just ignore them and toss them off as just normal aging.
Because we're laughing about this.
Right.
Oh, Mom couldn't find her keys, but we did find them in the garden.
Exactly.
Okay.
That is a problem. That's a problem.
Okay.
And what I like to tell people is you start paying attention. When you first see something that is very odd, start paying attention. When you start to see more and more of these types of behaviors, you need to get your loved one into the doctor.
Now, so how do we chronicle this? Do we call another relatives? I mean, what are we supposed to do? I mean, this is Mama and them, and they've always been in charge of everything.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, sometimes it's going to be difficult to get that loved one to the doctor. But you need to write some of these things down. Start calling relatives who spend time with this loved one and ask them, have they seen any changes? Have they noticed any differences?
Start collecting the data.
Start collecting data, but do it quickly. So don't wait like an entire year to collect data, and then your loved one has now gotten to the point where they're really starting to have problems, and they lock themselves out of the house, things like that, because you really want to take heed when you start seeing changes early on so you can get them to the doctor and they can get the appropriate care.